hello, hi. The commanding philosopher back another time, another week, poison tongue. Hey, how you doing? So, that was quite the announcement that we got, that I made a post about on YouTube. Quite the shake-up. It wasn't actually as bad as I probably think. It was probably not too bad. Just in the moment, it kind of threw things off for me a bit, and I'm going to touch on it again in the beginning of this, just because I said before. Let's actually go to this one. More subtle. A little more calming. I also haven't stood up for a stream in a while. Kind of getting used to that again. Bit strange. Okay, so basically, YouTube is shifting around their framework a little bit in a way that doesn't really convenience me, but also does convenience me. It's ironic how it works, but basically, they have the discussion tab, and that's what I've been using mostly to say when my streams are going to be, or any updates, delays or announcements or vacations and the whatnot. They're getting rid of that. Yay! And they're replacing it with this community post tab, which I do not qualify for. Normally you need 1,000 subscribers for it, but they're allowing more people to use it by only needing 500. Unfortunately, what this means for us $4.99 and below is that we can't make general posts to the grand public at large anymore through the platform. It would have to be either just a regular comment, probably a pinned comment on an existing video that we have, or through another means like Twitter or Twitter. They said they're trying to expand it for more people beyond this 500 threshold to maybe go 400, 300, 200, or whatever they do. But for the time being, that's going to be rather a slow rollover. October 12th, which is just about a month from today, month and 2 days from today, is when they're going to be making this change. Now this, while unfortunate, does work in our favor in that we should be going securely back into the YouTube realm by then. And YouTube can do this thing that I haven't been able to figure out if Twitch can, is you can actually schedule a specific stream video, and it'll give you a little timer, a little countdown when you click on it to say how long until the next stream, which is great because it's a reminder of when you're actually going to start the stream, regardless of time zone, regardless of daylight savings, regardless of what country in the world you're in. It's fantastic. Twitch doesn't do that. So even though YouTube's taking this away, it allows me to maintain some semblance of predictability when I do end up streaming and if I want to change my times around. However, it doesn't work so well if I want to stream on Twitch at different than normal times, which, like I mentioned in my post, kind of caters my decision towards maybe I'll do YouTube a little more often than Twitch. Who knows? I don't really want to get a Twitter right now. I don't really see great value. Well, before this announcement, I didn't see great value in it. But if I do any experiments, in terms of timing, in terms of the day of the week, I will dedicate those to YouTube, because those are clear-cut when they're going to happen. Anything I do that's kind of normal, I'll be allowed, or be able, comfortable to go in here on Twitch. Did I touch on everything? I talked about that, 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 and talked about that. Yeah, so this is stream number 14. We have 3 streams, including this one, before our Twitch trial is over and we can make our switch. And I am looking forward a little bit to going back to YouTube. I think a part of me has forgotten what it's like to stream on YouTube. The interface, the setup is slightly different. Hydration. More important now that you're standing up. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But the next 3 streams are unaffected. They will be on Twitch. And I'll try to mention again at the end of this stream what the plans are in terms of what we're going to be talking about. Because that's another thing. You can't really show a title of a stream ahead of time on Twitch, which I do miss. I do miss having this stream kind of set up, like ready to go and counting down almost a week in advance, because it builds the anticipation. It's something to look forward to. It's something to count down towards. It's something that is in your mind, like it's gonna happen. It could be 5 days away, but it's building up. You're kind of counting down. You're always like getting ready for it. And when it finally happens, even if the stream is so-so, at least it's that release of anticipation and the relief of, hey, I'm finally here. Which I like. I like that phenomenon. I think that's missing in a lot of things. Especially with the whole instant gratification. But that's a whole different discussion for another time, and that's actually one of my saved up discussions for later. So today, we are talking about not 1, not 2, but 3 different little topics. I was able to fit 3 in here because each of them are kind of short, and so it should give me enough to talk about, and I wanted to touch on all of them. I was going to fit a 4th in, but I figured I'll just start with 3, and if we have time, maybe I'll just chat about something else. The benefit of streaming late at night is that if I run out of stuff to say in a particular stream, it's already late at night. I could just cut it off and then maybe go to bed early or start winding down for the day, or, you know, let you get back to whatever you guys do on a Friday night in pandemic season. So, the first thing I want to talk about. This stream is called, what did I call this stream? Practice Centipedes and Frogs. So we're talking about the practice part. So everyone has heard about the phrase, practice makes perfect. And it's been around for quite a while, that phrase. And people sometimes swear by it, they follow it to a T. Sometimes they have experienced this and demonstrated this in their own lives, and it holds true. But I heard something, and I was made aware of this little difference, this little distinction that I think is worth calling attention to. If you change the phrase by extending it to this, instead of practice makes perfect, you have practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. And when I first heard that, I thought about it for a second, and it makes a lot more sense. If you practice something, there's no guarantee that the end result will be perfection. Now I say that, but there's going to be a caveat to that later on. But let me get to the first part first. Practice makes permanent, but perfect practice makes perfect. Here's an example. You're learning a musical instrument. Let's say you're learning a melody. Let's say you're practicing for a concert and you're trying to learn a very difficult melody. There's a lot of notes, they go very fast, and they're all over the place. It's not an easy passage to play by any stretch of the imagination. You could practice it, You could practice it over and over and over and over and over again. And you think you finally got it nailed down. You practice it so much that you can play it practically in your sleep. You just sit down and you can whip it out and you can play the whole thing all the way through exactly as you've practiced it. You get to the concert, well, hopefully not the concert. You get to another practice session. Let's say you were able enough to have some time to recover. You get to your practice session, you play it out, the band director stops the whole band right after that section, and then he does, or she does, the dreaded thing, turns in your direction and says, "Okay, just you guys, let me hear ya." And once the brief moment of panic passes, of, okay, what did we do wrong? It gives way to another brief moment of panic when you realize that you are the only one playing something different than everybody else. Turns out you practiced a couple of the wrong notes. You can play those wrong notes expertly. You can play them beautifully, you can play them with your eyes closed, you can play them any day of the week, but they are still the wrong notes. So practice did not make you perfect because you ended up wrong. Practice made permanent. So, now that you've practiced the wrong way so much, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to unlearn that and then learn the right way. Because now you've almost instinctively gotten the muscle memory to do it the wrong way. Not only do you have to learn the right way, but at the same time, you now have to fight yourself. You now have to fight your own muscle memory, your own instinct of playing the wrong way and force it to relearn. That's why learning something one way and then trying to learn it a different way is so much harder. Because you're now fighting not just the unknown, but you're also fighting yourself. Another example, if you're cooking, let's say you're trying to make a sauce in a recipe, or any sort of dish where you need a certain ratio of ingredients. Let's say you're making a fancy spaghetti sauce and you do a little bit of tomato, a little bit of, let's say, butter, a little bit of herbs, a little bit of, tomato puree or fresh tomatoes, maybe some peppers, onions, and you do this certain ratio and you get it right. You think. You taste it, it doesn't really taste good. So you try again. Maybe you get a different ratio. And you think after maybe, 10 different tries. You make the sauce 10 different times and you finally land on a ratio of ingredients, on a concoction that you think is what you're looking for. Now let's just say that in this case, it's not a great flavor. It's not even the flavor you were looking for in the first place. But your taste buds and your food memory have been, I don't want to say tainted, but let's say tainted by the previous 9 tries that were even worse, that this 10th one, by comparison, is amazing compared to the other 9. When even compared to what the sauce should be, it stinks. So now you start making that 10th recipe, and let's say you're just cooking for yourself over and over and over, and now this is the flavor that you accustom yourself to. So now you go and you start sharing the recipe with others. They start making it, they taste it. It's completely not disgusting. It does not taste that impressive. And then you start gushing about it. Maybe some people taste like it tastes terrible. And then maybe you taste their recipes. And you find, man, mine really isn't good. Now, altering ingredients in a recipe is probably a bit easier to adjust than muscle memory your way through an instrument. But sometimes habits are hard to break. That's why they say, hard to break habits. Or what was it? Habits die hard? Habits die hard. I think that's the phrase. Habits die hard. So, practicing doesn't always mean you're going to get it right when you practice. It just means you're going to get down whatever you're practicing pretty ingrained within whatever you're doing. So, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent, but perfect practice makes perfect. If you practice perfectly every time, you will get perfection. Now, I mentioned earlier that there was a caveat where practice makes perfect is in fact true. Where perfect practice may still make perfect, but practice, even of the non-perfect variety, can still make relatively perfect. For many things, there is an easy way and there is a hard way. But more often than not, both ways will get you to where you need to go. It may take more effort, it may take more time, it may take a higher learning curve, it may be more difficult, more frustrating, but it will get you there. And maybe you'll be fantastic at it by the end. So if you practice something where there's not necessarily a wrong way, there's no clear version of right or wrong, good or bad, it's just difficult or less difficult. But you get it down to a subconscious art, and you can do it. And let's say someone who's not used to it tries it, and they can't do even the first step because it's so difficult. And there's an easy way right over there, but you're like, I can do it this way. I'll do it this way. In that case, practice kind of made you perfect. You were practicing the hard way, where others may just go straight to the easy way. Even if you didn't know the hard way was the hard way, at the time it may have just been the only way. But you still got it done. Here's an example. And this is not an example from personal experience, but from the personal experience of other people that I've talked to. Airplanes. Flying airplanes. Now I hope I don't scare any of you out of flying commercial after this story. Just bear with me. So, the cockpit design of the 1950s, the 1960s, is very different than the cockpit design of the 2000s, 2010s, even the 2020s, probably. And I'm not just talking in terms of the level of technology. Sure, now we have almost mainstream touch screens, where back then they just had little needles behind glass. Now we have one button that does 10 different things. Back then they had 10 different buttons for each of those 10 different things. Now we have more coordinated ways of doing stuff behind the scenes where the aircraft does it for the pilot, versus back then the pilot was in charge of everything and they had to do everything themselves. And they needed the amount of controls to allow them to do that. So a story that I've heard, the layout of a cockpit for, let's say, a standard military jet in the 70s or 80s. Let's just say 70s and 80s, even that far. Well, let's say no. Let's say it was designed, let's say, in the 50s, and the design just didn't change for 30 years. So it was designed in the 50s. The 50s mentality, 50s style of philosophy of making it. There's tons of buttons. And the buttons are everywhere. If you've ever seen a military aircraft cockpit, you'll know that it's almost like the location of the person, or the space to allow the person to fit in there, was an afterthought, or the last thing they considered. I won't say an afterthought, because I will reserve that for the design of submarines. If you've ever been on a submarine, either at like a national, or I mean not national, but a history museum or a nautical exhibit or anything like that, you'll know that submarines are designed to be extremely space efficient while still having as many things on it as possible. Things for loading and storing weapons, things for running all the different pipes, for doing raising and lowering at faster speeds, controlling the engine, controlling the buoyancy, controlling all the stuff, and then, knowing that there's people there, they have to have a kitchen, they have to have space to sleep, they have to have some semblance of places to gather and discuss and, plan and everything like that. And if you look inside of it, I'm going on a real big tangent, but I'm going to go with it. If you look on the inside of a submarine, and you try to walk from one end to the other, odds are you can see. If all the doors in between are open, you can see. Stand on one end and look all the way and see the other end, the long way end of the submarine. It won't be a very big window. It'll be a very small window. Because it's like the people, the corridor and the pathways for people were not set in place, and then all the equipment was designed to fit around those corridors, as maybe some building infrastructures are made. You go into a modern architecturally designed building, you see corridors to allow people to move, and then all the piping and all the electronics and all this stuff is kind of shoved out of the way because the priority is on people moving. It is almost the exact opposite on a submarine. You put all the equipment in there, and the way that people move is kind of wherever equipment isn't. It's almost like they tried to fit in a corridor or a pathway after everything was already in there. It's quite difficult. Now, it's not as bad. The cockpit of a what's it called? Military cockpit, but if you look at it and you understand anything about ergonomics, it'll give you a nightmare. But basically, you kind of fit with your legs kind of apart, and whatever space is between your legs, there's a whole console, there's tons of buttons, there's a stick to control your flight, where your arms are kind of by your sides because everywhere else around them is covered with more controls. There's some in front of you, on your left, on your right, behind your head, up above you. Everywhere you look, it's either a glass cockpit, a chair, or buttons, for the most part. Now, with that many controls, and many of them in very hard to reach places, most of it you can't even see, it'll take a long time to figure out how to fly that thing, a very long time. But once you do, then it can become natural to you. So in that case, practice does indeed make perfect, because you can operate that cockpit perfectly with enough practice, even though the cockpit itself is not conducive to easy or simple or quickly learned operation at all. Now let's compare that to more modern commercial cockpits. There's still a bunch of buttons, because they're not only flying a plane, but they're also responsible for the transport, care, safety, and comfort of dozens of passengers. So there's lots of controls. Maybe there are some behind your head. Look up away from the window to reach. And that's the same kind of philosophy for when you're driving. You're driving along, and anything that requires you to take your eyes off the road, they have to minimize the amount of time that your eyes are not looking where you're going at 40 miles an hour. It's a similar philosophy for an airplane. Anything that requires you to not look at where you're flying at maybe 1,000 miles an hour, they want to minimize how long you're not actually looking out the window. So if you have a control that you have to go to, say, every few minutes, that is directly behind you, you can't operate it without looking at it, that's not a very good design. But in the most cases, commercially designed cockpits avoid that. They make the cockpit easier to use. So if you started in a military cockpit and you walked into a commercial, you'd probably be able to figure out how to fly it relatively easily, relatively quickly. If you did the opposite way, you went from commercial to military, you'd probably be lost. Because everything is in a different place, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff you never had to worry about. It's very much a one-way steep slope of a learning curve. With the commercial, you don't need a whole lot of practice to get it right. Military, you do. But in either case, practice will make perfect. You may not like it, but it will. Here's a more relatable example. Typing. And this is something that I've talked with a lot of people about for years. I took a course in school, high school, I think, on proper typing technique. And I'm talking about typing on a keyboard. Like, how do you position your fingers? What fingers are supposed to hit which buttons? How do you properly position your hand on the number pad? And what fingers goes to which one? What thumb, left or right, do you hit the space bar with? When do you do which? How do you reach? How do you contort? What's the backspace? Is that ring finger or pinky finger? And all this stuff. There's rules, there's structure. Now, I learned that, and I can type pretty fast. And I learned what they consider the proper way to type. I know some people that type with only their index fingers, and they stare down at the keyboard, and they type one letter at a time. But they do it so fast, their hands are whipping across the keyboard, and they're getting it right. Possibly with the help of autocorrect, but I won't accuse anyone of anything for that. So they practiced it. It's not an efficient way of typing by any means, but they practice enough that they can get typing perfectly. And some people type with only one hand. Some people don't use their pinkies. Some people don't use their thumbs. Some people skip their ring fingers and use their pinkies in the middle, in between. Some people develop their own techniques. Some people follow more established techniques, but they still get the typing job done because they practiced to the point of perfecting their particular technique. In cockpit operation, can you do it? Can't you? Typing, can you do it? Can't you? It's not really can or can't. It's how well. And with enough practice, you can do them very well. When it comes to playing a passage correctly or incorrectly, when it comes to making a sauce taste great or horrible, it's a bit more clear to say whether you got it right or not. So it's really the difference of whether the concept of right or wrong exists or not, whether practice makes perfect or practice only makes permanent, but you can still permanently learn the wrong thing. So, next time someone says to you, practice makes perfect, you can know in the back of your head, but only if you practice perfectly. And maybe this can, I don't know, you can take something from this, I guess. I guess the only takeaway would be every so often, check up that what you're practicing is actually the right thing to be practicing. And if it's not, the sooner you switch over to what you're actually supposed to practice, the way better. It's much harder to unlearn it later. So that's half an hour. Not bad. 30 minutes for the first topic. So that's practice makes permanent. Whew. You know, I was originally planning on making that my 4th stream. No, my 3rd. I was planning on making that my 3rd stream, but then I decided to jump into piano, and then we went to composing, and then we went to designing, and then we went to, well, I went on a month break, and then we went all the way over to Twitch, and so much has happened. But I have had that Practice Makes Permanent stream saved up since week 3. And I finally got to say it. Now, excuse me, I'm going to have a couple wasabi peas, because these things are very good. Munch, munch, munch. Oh, that is loud in my headphones. I've learned how to eat these without burning my nostrils. My sinuses. You have to not breathe out through your nose while you're chewing. Oh, those are so good. If you've never had wasabi peas, if you like wasabi, it doesn't taste like peas at all. It just tastes like crunchy wasabi. It's like wasabi potato chips in little spheres. It's very good. The pea part doesn't really have a strong taste. I can sort of taste it. I think they're just regular green peas. I can sort of taste a pea aftertaste, but the wasabi is definitely much stronger. Ooh. Can't have too much. Because you'd think your sinuses, the roof of your mouth would be the problem. It's actually your tongue that's the problem. Your tongue will start to hurt first. Okay, so, second topic. We talked about practice. Now we're talking about centipedes. So what are the centipedes doing here? Sorry, I'm just adjusting my Twitch layout here. Perfect. Okay, so centipedes. So this is something called, and this is not as common, it's called the Centipedes Dilemma. And it starts with a story. I was going to talk about this during the trolley problem, but decided to save it for today. So the Centipedes Dilemma goes like this. There's a centipede walking along the ground, minding his own business, just shuffling leg after leg, all 100 of them. And then a dragonfly comes down, lands in front of him. And the dragonfly says, "I've been watching you from up above in the sky. And I think it's fascinating that you can move your 100 legs, where I only have 4 little ones." I think it was 4. Anatomically correct to the matter here. And so the centipede says, "Thank you for noticing. I am proud of how well I can move all 100 of my legs." And so the dragonfly asks, "Can I get a closer look?" So the centipede starts walking forward slowly. The dragonfly has a closer look and is very impressed. And then the dragonfly poses a peculiar question. He asks, "What does your 37th left leg look like when you're walking?" And so the centipede takes a look at his 37th left leg, and he says, "I don't know. Let's find out." And so he tries to walk forward while paying attention to his 37th left leg. And he finds that he can't because he's looking backwards. So then he looks forward and says to the dragonfly, "You watch this leg for me." And so the centipede starts to walk forward again. But he can't. His legs start to trip up against each other, something that has never happened to him before. His legs are crisscrossing and getting caught in one another, so he's looking back at each of his legs, and legs that he never paid attention to are starting to mess up. And the more and more he inspects his legs as he tries to get walking again, the worse and worse he does, until he can't walk anymore. Then the dragonfly, unimpressed now, flies away. And the centipede still can't walk. So, what is this story talking about? This story is talking about the phenomenon where we do something without even thinking about it, and we can do it flawlessly. But the moment we start paying attention to the intricacies of how exactly we do it, we suddenly can't. We suddenly find that we mess up, we make mistakes, we fall apart. It doesn't work anymore. There's another story where this actually happened. A famous violinist was in concert, playing with an orchestra, playing this beautiful solo halfway through the piece. And when the piece was over, the conductor asked the violinist to play that solo again, so that the other violinists could watch. And so she tried. And she started making mistake after mistake after mistake. This is the Centipedes Dilemma. We do things that are controlled by our subconscious. Our conscious mind has nothing to do with how it works. But as soon as the conscious mind tries to take control of this subconscious action, it can't do it nearly as good as the subconscious is able to, and so we mess up. However, once we are aware that we messed up on something, once it's in our mind, once we started paying attention to it one time, it's very difficult to take our mind off of it again. Because the next time we do it, we're thinking, oh, the last time I paid attention to this, I couldn't do it. But when I didn't pay attention to it, I could do it. I wonder what I did different. So now you're trying to do it normally. But the fact that you're still thinking about it means that your conscious mind is still intruding on your subconscious action. You're still going to mess up. It's very hard to intentionally and completely forget about something that you're doing just so you can do it perfectly again. Here's an example that you can do right now. And I may ruin this for you, but, well, the only way you learn. Breathing. You've probably been breathing this whole time without really paying attention to how you breathe. How much do you inhale? Do you hold it for a half second and then you exhale? Do you exhale, hold it, and then breathe inhale? Or do you just go constantly back and forth? Do you start slow, take an inhale and then end slow? Exhale a lot and then exhale a little? Or is it a constant flow in, constant flow out? How do you breathe? If you've never paid attention to it, once you do, you'll find that it's hard to feel like you're breathing naturally again. So if you try that right now, if you pay attention, just take a deep breath in, deep breath out, and pay attention to your lungs, your diaphragm. Is your belly expanding? Is your chest expanding? Which one? And now, when you try to stop the big breaths in and breaths out and just try to breathe normally again, can you stop paying attention to your diaphragm, your lungs, your chest, your belly? Can you truly ignore it again now that you paid attention to it? Centipedes Dilemma. Now, I feel sympathy for people who have to teach things that are performance-based. And the reason for that is because sometimes they have to alternate between demonstrating and then breaking down the performance piece by piece. So when they do, it's hard to learn from someone who is constantly, making mistakes. Now, I am related to a performance-based teacher, and I have taught performancing. I've taught a couple things informally, but I have taught, beginning on piano. I've taught a couple things on percussion instruments. Like I mentioned in my percussion top 10 stream, I've done marimba, vibraphone, xylophone lessons, taught people how to do runs, how to do 4 mallets, 2 in each hand. And when you try to demonstrate how to play 4 mallets smoothly, even if you do it during a show, completely naturally, you make no mistakes, you do it no problem. As soon as you break it down, piece by piece, and then after you break it down, you start putting it together again. You don't put it back together as well as you did before you started paying attention to it. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't happen. And so performance-based teachers kind of have to do that on a daily basis. So they have to really know what they're doing, and they have to understand this interplay between how much is me actually paying attention to what I'm doing going to mess me up. And it's fascinating that that's even a thing you have to consider, but it is. Just like the centipede. Luckily, there were no birds around. Okay. As I'm actually going through this, I'm realizing how short these little topics are. So I'm getting a better understanding of how long it takes me to talk about something, just based on how many different concepts I have written down, and so on and so forth. Which is just me slowly learning myself as a streamer, learning how to do this. I would have thought that 3 topics would take a full 2 hours to talk through, but it looks like a lot on paper, but you talk through it really quick. So if you ever want to start streaming, or if you want to start talking about stuff on streaming and you want to have a prepared list, it'll take a couple tries to really understand how fast you talk, how many tangents you tend to go on, and, your performance mode. Sometimes you're in a different mindset where you're practicing by yourself, no one's recording, and you get all these different ideas, and you have all these different phrases and ways of delivery and all this stuff, and then when you're finally put in front of a live camera, all that disappears. All goes blank. That's the thing that happens sometimes. Whenever I'm recording myself playing piano, it's weird, and I haven't quite figured out why. It might be just the self-consciousness of it. But whenever I practice piano, practice a song that I want to write or record or something, I can play it and practice it just fine. But as soon as the camera turns on to record myself, I cannot play it all the way through flawlessly. Even if I did 3 times in a row just beforehand, I cannot do it. That's some more wasabi. Wasabi, kimosabi. That's an old reference. Oh, that was a strong one. I should not have gotten an entire canister of these. Normally I get the Ziploc. This is, I think, twice as much as the Ziploc. And I swear, I'm like a fly butting its head into a window. Butting head into the window, it hurts, it doesn't work. Try again, it hurts, doesn't work. Try again, it hurts, doesn't work. It's like eating the peas. It'll make my tongue hurt. But it tastes so good, let's do it again. It'll make my tongue hurt. But it tastes so good, let's do it again. It's the same thing. Okay, we talked about practice. Talked about centipedes. Now we're talking about frogs. This one's going to be a fun one. Because this one has moral implications. And potentially business implications, and a whole bunch of other implications. There's so many situations you can apply this to. So, what kind of frogs are we talking about? Well, specifically, we're talking about the concept of a slowly boiling frog. Now here's the scenario. Frogs, like most most amphibians, or all amphibians, are cold-blooded, which means they do not generate their own body heat like we do. We have an internal temperature regulating system controlled by our heart. The heart pumps the blood has heat, and it spreads the heat throughout our body. That's why if you want to heat up, you exercise, so the heart gets pumping, and it pumps that heated blood throughout your limbs to heat you up. And when you want to cool down, you're supposed to cool down the back of your neck, because the back of your neck is really close to a major artery that comes from the heart. So you're cooling down the blood that goes to the rest of your body. That's why you always wear wet towels over the back of your neck if you want to cool down. Or if you do cardio if you want to heat up. It's all about the heat of the blood. And we can do that with our bodies. Frogs cannot. The temperature of the frog's blood, and therefore a frog's body, is determined entirely by the world around them, the environment. Are they in the sun? Are they in the shade? Are they in water? Are they on land? Are they high up? Are they low elevation, high elevation? Now, frogs, that's not to say that they have no sense of temperature whatsoever. It's just that they slowly adjust to whatever the temperature around them is. So if you have a frog in room temperature, and you have a beaker of water, and it's over a flame, and the water is boiling hot. It's bubbling, steam coming out. You have a frog in your hand, and you approach the beaker, and you move your hand closer to the beaker, closer to the heat. The frog will be able to sense that it is getting closer to a temperature that is much hotter than what it is now. So it will start to crawl away. It will start to move further and further away from the heat, the closer and closer you try to put it there. Now let's change the situation. Let's say you just have a regular beaker filled with water that is at room temperature. You have a frog that is at room temperature. The frog will probably not resist being put into the water. In fact, it might like it. The amphibious part of it might like it, might jump right in. So now you have a room temperature frog in room temperature water. Now let's say that you slowly add heat to the water. Slowly being the key word. You slowly add heat to the water. The water temperature goes up a bit, tiny bit. But because frogs are cold-blooded, their temperature is affected by the world around them. Right now, the world around them is that water. So their temperature will rise to be the same as the water. Meanwhile, you're still heating up that water. So let's say you start at 70 degrees. You heat it up to 72. Now the frog is heating itself up from the water to 72. So the frog only sees the world around it be 2 degrees hotter. But then it matches. Let's say you keep heating the water. So now it's at 74 by the time the frog reaches 72. So now the frog goes up to 74. So if you heat up the water at the same rate or slower that the frog's own body can keep up, then even though the overall temperature is going up, the frog will only perceive a 1 or 2 degree difference constantly. It won't notice that it's getting hotter because it has no concept of hot or cold. Our concept of hot or cold is relative to our internal temperature because it's relatively stable. Theirs is always fluctuating. So there's nothing to compare to if it's very close. Now the fact that it's always only 2 degrees hotter means it's not in danger. Nothing's bad is going to happen. Whether the frog is at 72 degrees, the water's at 74. The frog is at 80 degrees, the water's at 82. Frog is at 94 degrees, the water's at 96. I think you see where this is going. The frog will perceive only a 2 degree temperature difference. But the frog's internal organs will fail at a certain temperature, regardless of how it feels. Eventually, you'll get to the point where the water gets so hot that it may start to boil. Little bubbles start popping up, and the frog feels absolutely no danger. And it'll keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And the frog will be thinking it's safe, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe, it's dead. It will die, likely without ever realizing it's in any danger. But if it does, it would be too late of a realization. This is the concept of the slowly boiling frog. And it is representative of how many people interact in situations. If you have a situation that is drastically different than the one you're in, and it becomes so quickly, you are often quick to react because it's rather difficult to ignore that change. It's very easy to notice it. Quick emergencies presenting sudden danger cause quick reactions. That's not usually the problem. The problem is the slow boil. The problem is something that gets worse over a long time. But it keeps consistently getting worse and worse and worse. Everything seems fine because it's not different, really different than what it was, say, a short while ago. And a short while from now, you'll look back and say, oh, well, it wasn't that much different than before. And then later you'll say, oh, it's not that much different from before. And then later you'll say, oh, it's not much different than before. And that'll be the pattern that repeats, because the change is very small over a short amount of time. That is sometimes often enough to convince people to ignore the bigger picture. But when the bigger picture becomes dangerous, all the little steps, sometimes you don't notice it until something snaps. But by then, it's more often than not too late. You don't see the bigger trend, you just see a little bit. This is something that is more relatable, I guess, in changes in people. People that you are exposed to or around for a long time. For instance, facial hair. Is not the best example, but facial hair. The facial hair you have today may be very similar to the facial hair you had yesterday. Maybe it's a very slow growth. The facial hair tomorrow, very similar to the facial hair you had today. And 2 days from now, similar to tomorrow. 3 days, similar to 2 days. So if you always look at this person's face, it may strike you that they're getting more and more, but only if you reflect over several days. But the change can be so gradual, so slow, that you don't really notice it. A more serious, more dangerous example. Someone is getting angry at life, at the world, at the way things are going, but there's no single event that started this. It's just a slow build, maybe even over the course of years. Just things start to happen that make you angry. But not to the point where people would call you out on it. Just a couple things start to trigger you, tick you off, easier than they did before. And then you get a little angrier, and a little more temperamental, until it's at the point where anything can make you grumpy. Which is a stark contrast to how you were 2 years ago, but almost no different to how you were last week. Almost. Keyword, almost. The change is gradual, the change is always happening, but you don't notice it until you look back at the bigger picture. Here's a more financial example. You're working on a project, and you have, say, 6 months to do it, and you start on the first day you're assigned. And let's say you find out one little hiccup. Maybe one of your group members, he goes on vacation. Another one gets sick. Another one has family visiting. Another one tried an idea, spent a week or two on it, only for having it not work. So you have to go back to square one, try. All these little things that build up. Oh, well, we have time. Oh, well, we're still working on it. Oh, well, that's understandable. Oh, it's only a week. Oh, it's only a day. And then you find yourself with 2 months left and nothing to show for it. And you're saying, wait a minute, step back, bigger picture, we only have 2 months left. What were we doing to those first 4 months? And it catches you off guard. Now in that example, it's not too late, because you can still probably salvage something. But it's the moments where you can't salvage anything, the moments where you realize 1 day before, or 1 week before, or half a month before. Because all these little things didn't seem to be that big of a problem, but they were delaying your progress bit by bit, by bit, by bit. So each little delay may have been a 1 day at a time. Oh, instead of doing it today, we'll just get it done tomorrow. Oh, let's do it Friday, we'll just do it on Monday. But if you add them up over time, the temperature has been rising for quite a while. The change in temp, very small. But you're 30 degrees hotter than when you started. So the concept of a slowly boiling frog can be applied to many different things, and really it just serves as a reminder to every so often take a step back, even if it seems like nothing is wrong, even if it seems that everything is fine. Just take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Because it can really save you. It can really make a difference. So, now I know that 3 kind of short topics take only about an hour. Which I guess is good, because it is late at night. If this was more during the afternoon, I'd probably pick something that was more substantial. But again, I chose kind of shorter topics just to gauge how long it takes. So about 20 minutes each. And it took about 30 minutes to do the first one because I went on tangents. The Centipede was rather quick. But so that's all that I have for this week. That was fun. I like talking about that stuff. Now I'm curious, because next stream, what do we do next stream? So next stream, we are taking another peek at composing. We are going to compose our waiting screen theme, finally. Now, it's really, I have a couple ideas for it, and I'm excited to get into it, because I've been writing and rewriting the chords and the structure and the format, and I have a pretty good idea. But it's short enough, it's simple enough, that we are able to start from a literal blank sheet of paper, which is different from the old one. So, I'll be able to show you, starting from nothing, from the dreaded empty piece of paper, how we get started. And then how the ideas just flow from there. Now that one I may end up starting a bit earlier, because I may get carried away and want to keep going with it. But I don't think that'll take more than 2 streams to write. Of course, I said that with the first one, and that was already written, and that took, what, 3 streams? No, that was the Blender thing. I'm getting confused. But yeah, I'm excited to jump back into it again, into writing music again. And if you notice, I uploaded this theme, Sons of Venom, and the other one, Toxic Moonlight. I uploaded both of those as their own individual videos on my channel. And I will be doing the same thing for the other 3 background songs as soon as we make them. So once we finish this, expect to see probably a snapshot or some similar thing with the waiting screen as the background. Something similar. But that'll be available to play. And I don't know if you noticed this, but on YouTube, I don't know if this is new, but they added a loop function. So you don't have to go to listen on repeat or YouTube repeat, as I used to do the past 10 years. You can actually just right-click the video, and there's a loop option. It's the first one listed. Just click that, and it loops over and over. And since these are our looping background themes, it should sound pretty good. Just put it in the background. And if you do want to use this, if for any reason you want to use this music for anything, any project, or if you want to have it playing in the background as you film something, as like a live background music or anything like that, as long as you credit me as a composer, feel free. As long as you credit me as a composer, because I can demonstrate the stream where it was composed, I can demonstrate the file where it originated, but as long as you attach my name to the original source, give credit where credit is due, make away. If you're making something, I wholly encourage it. You know me. I want to be encouraging others to make. So I want you to make something. And if my music helps you make something, then by all means, start creating. And hopefully next week we will have a third background song that you might get to use. It's going to be very different. It's going to be very different from these two that you're listening to right now. Very different. I already have a couple ideas, and I'm going for a completely different vibe. But yeah, so next week I am going to plan on starting at 8 p.m. But I say that tentatively. I will post another discussion post while I can, confirming the actual time later. But yeah, that's going to be really, really exciting. I've rewritten that thing like 5 different times, and I'm super stoked to be able to show you, beginning to end, just what does it take to write a song, and all the different tangents I go off of, and the melodies I hum to myself. It's gonna be fun. And once you find the name for that one, I won't give away too much. We'll save it for next week. I won't give away too much. So, I think I don't really feel ready to end it. I take back what I said earlier. I don't feel ready to end. I want to talk about one other thing. It's gonna kind of short. I did finish up earlier than I expected, so I'm gonna look back and see if my schedule allows me to jump ahead a little bit and talk about this. There we go. Okay. So mark that as yes. So I'm actually going to leave it. I'm going to change. I wonder if I can change this. So I just changed the title. That should have changed. I think that works. Which kind of sounds redundant because centipedes are bugs, but hear me out. So, this surprise, impromptu, additional discussion, because it seems appropriate given the frog discussion. There's a phrase, and the phrase comes from a children's book. Now, I was never personally read this children's book, but I know someone who was, or read it to their kids. It is called... I don't actually know what it's called, but I'll describe it. And there's a phrase. I'll just pretend that the phrase is the title. It's called, "Bring me a rock." Bring me a rock. And by the end of this little story, you will learn to hate that phrase just as much as I do. So, the story goes like this. Now, forgive me if I stumble over myself. This is legitimately improv, so I have nothing written down. No guide, no nothing. Let's see what we got. Bring me a rock. The story goes, there are a bunch of insects. And one day, a grasshopper decides to make himself king. And so he does. And so the grasshopper is king, and the other insects, ants, beetles, slugs, worms, I know they're not all bugs, do his bidding. And so one day, the grasshopper sees another grasshopper in a different kingdom with a bunch of nice shiny rocks, really big rocks. And the grasshopper looks at his own store, and they're kind of small. And so the grasshopper calls all his subjects without telling them about the other king, and says, "Bring me a rock." And so the bugs go out, and they look for a rock. And so the first bug comes back, a little ant, brings back a little pebble. And the grasshopper says, "That is not the rock that I want. Go bring me a rock." So the ant goes away looking for another rock. Later, the beetle comes up with a much bigger but oddly shaped rock. Got a piece missing. And the grasshopper says, that's not the rock I'm looking for. Go bring me a rock. So the beetle tosses the rock aside, goes looking for more rocks. And then a slug comes over with a perfectly round, spherical, quite large rock. But it's covered and caked in dirt and mud and leaves. And the grasshopper says, that's not the rock I want. Bring me a rock. And so the worm, who watches these other three bring rocks, only to be told it was not the rock the grasshopper is looking for, decides to go up to the grasshopper and say, what kind of rock are you looking for? And the grasshopper says, just bring me a rock. And so he goes out and tries to find a rock for the grasshopper. Meanwhile, the ant, the beetle, and the slug have all returned with second rocks, all of which the grasshopper has rejected, but did not say why. Only told him to get a rock, but did not describe what kind of rock. And so the worm, able to dig under the ground, communicates with the other worms in the other grasshopper's kingdom. And he finds out the kinds of rocks that the other grasshopper has. And so now the worm goes out and tries to find a rock on their kingdom, just like what the grasshopper had. Finds a rock, brings it to the grasshopper. And the worm thinks this is perfect. It's identical to the one the other grasshopper had. And the grasshopper says, not what I want. Bring me a rock. And this continues almost indefinitely until they all die of birds or something. That's not actually how the story goes. The children's story has a much better ending. But basically, the idea of this story is sometimes you are faced with people that you must work for, whether they are customers at a restaurant, or bosses in a company, or, I don't know, parents as a babysitter, or anything. Faced with people that want something from you, but they won't tell you what. And when you give them something that you think they want, they don't want it, but they don't tell you why it's wrong, or they don't tell you what they were looking for instead. I have personally run across this in my career. I've seen other people run across it in their career. It is not as sparse as you think. You would think that it's almost common sense that if you're looking for something, even after the first attempt, you would help them. You'd tell them, I want this, here's what I want it to look like. You would be surprised how few people actually do that. And so when you're in that situation, and you're talking about, well, what do they want? Is this good enough? I don't know. And you can just say, well, this is a bring me a rock scenario. Or if you're trying to explain it to someone who's not in the know, say someone who just joined, someone who wants to help, and you're saying, okay, what's going on here? And you say, I got an order to bring my boss a rock. He just says, bring me a rock. And if you know the story, you know exactly the kind of dynamic you're involved with. Whew, I don't think I did that bad for a completely improv storytelling session. A couple things I'm thinking about in hindsight I could have done differently, but these wasabi peas are really good. So, that is actually the end of our stream. And I already marked down that I talked about the rock. DJ. So, that will be it. Next week, I'm going to try and aim for 8 o'clock. I will confirm on the discussion at YouTube. And next week, we're going to start writing our new song. And I'm thinking I might save some of these discussions until we get to a point where we can work with other people. Because they're things that I kind of want someone else to respond to. So that might push off. And we have a lot of music to write and a lot of animating and other stuff to do. So we have a whole bunch of stuff that isn't just these talking sessions. But I did miss this. I missed the energy of standing up because I feel more active. I feel more animated this way. So, next week, stream number 15. Until then, I am Commanding Philosopher Poison Tongue, signing off for this week. And remember, no matter how bad things get out there, always try to find that spark of something to keep you going. And if you ever think you can, or think you want to, but don't think you can, just try. I will see you next week. And until then, keep on making.